Well, good morning, everyone. It is 10:02, so we're going to get in Ojai. It's not 10:02 in Halifax, so Nova Scotia. But we're going to get started. This brings us to the end of our first week with Dr. Ravi Ravindra. And it's been quite a week of different thoughts and exchanges and fascinating conversation. I'm always amazed at how quickly the time goes at the end, the second part of our program, because there's so many interesting questions that come up or just comments that sort of move us into a void of some kind where there's no time. And then suddenly we realize that we're at the end of the program. So I want to thank everyone for that because that's what this is about. It's really about moving past that whole the four walls of the time space continuum that we live in and moving into something that's a little bit deeper and richer and much more from the heart. So here we are at our last day of the first week, so we will get started. Over to you, Raviji.
Okay, and as we have done in the past, we'll take a few minutes to find a little quieting of our mind. Because something you have heard me say this many times, according to all the spiritual teachers, there are many levels of reality subtler than the mind. And that the mind cannot grasp this or describe this. But that doesn't mean to be against the mind, but also to be a little free of the mental agitation or mental associations so that one can try to connect a little bit with subtler realities. Again, something that I have said many times, but there are one or two new people today, so this may be new for them. I regard this very helpful to me to remind myself periodically that I did not create myself. Obviously, this is true for all of us, not only me. And the energy that keeps this body alive for a few decades enters into this body through breath. And we have the linguistic habit of referring to this as my breath. That would be surprising. I would have no idea how to create the air that I need to breathe or how to create this breathing apparatus. It is actually the divine energy entering into this body as breath. It's not my breath, but breath in me. So pay a little attention to this without becoming agitated. And the call in all spiritual teachings, and we would see this also being emphasized today's talk by the remarks of Krishnamurti, the call is for us to be as free as we possibly can from our own fears or desires, so that we can receive this subtler energy to touch us more and more deeply and to actually transform the quality of our being. So, very strong suggestion or requirement actually that it is not a question of me grabbing or controlling this divine energy, but becoming more and more receptive to them so that I can receive them without agitation or without wishing to control something or to take command of something. And that requires more and more receptivity, which, as I have said more than once, First of all, a physical relaxation, because all our tensions, physical, emotional, intellectual, all tensions arise, at least in my experience, and you can check in your own case, all these tensions arise from either self-assertion or fear. Which is why in all serious teachings, if you wish to be a real searcher rather than believing this or that, the call always is to be more and more free of our fears and desires. Obviously, similar things are said by contemporary sages. For example, Krishnamurti. Today we'll speak about that in a few minutes. So find as much relaxation as you can and receive this breath, which is keeping me alive, as the divine breath. And again, as I had said earlier, maybe yesterday more specifically, the last opening to close after the birth of a baby is at the top of the head. And especially in classical yoga literature, very strong emphasis that then creates a barrier between subtler energies surrounding all around me. It's easier to say above me simply to indicate that they are higher than me, subtler than me, not above in the sense of physically, they're all around me, also inside me. But then if I, as it were, try to breathe in through my skull, I am inviting these subtle energies to enter into me. And I place my out breath into the whole of my body, right down to the toes, with a wish to be nourished by these energies. But remaining relaxed and not holding your breath outside or inside. And also helpful to find a posture, really more or less a verticality without some kind of rigidity. That posture allows the energies to move in the body without restriction and without obstacles. And as I had even pointed out yesterday, in the whole of the Abrahamic tradition, you hardly ever see the portrait of a prophet in the form of meditation. They're always the expression of prayer, slightly looking up, wishing to receive these subtler energies. In the Indian tradition, classical example of the Buddha and Mahavira, contemporary times, Aurobindo, Krishnamurti, Vivekananda, more emphasis on a posture of meditation, not looking up or down or sideways, but paying attention inside, more and more attention inside. So I always recommend to my fellow searchers that what we need is an attitude of prayer, that I am wishing to receive something from a higher level, but posture of meditation. Even Christ only once in any gospel, canonical or non-canonical, actually makes this remark that the kingdom of God is within you. And this is the fundamental expression in all serious spiritual enunciations. So we are not searching outside. Deeper and deeper look inside. That requires more and more freedom from my usual associations, my mind jumping around here, there. So if I can intentionally connect my mobile mind with my body, which is much more stable. So a little sensation of some part of my body. For example, I can now try to sense my back. That automatically brings the mind a little closer to me, connecting with my body rather than running around. And I now invite you to maybe intentionally try to sense your right leg. A reminder, this is actually a remark of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, that he's seated in my body, also in my mind, in my heart. If we don't dismiss these, God also is in my body. So I try to sense my right leg without becoming agitated in any case, but subtler and subtler sensation. Just a quick reminder, everything has many levels. For example, if my trousers are touching my leg, that also creates sensation. But I am inviting you to sense inside more deeply at the very center of your leg. Presence of divine energy keeping this leg alive. Thought has levels, feelings have levels, sensation has levels. So don't get stuck with just ordinary surface sensation. Presence of divine energy in your body, now specifically focusing on right leg. Now we shift our attention to the left leg. And it is assisted if I, as it were, intentionally place my out breath in my left leg. Remembering that this breath that is coming into me, keeping me alive, is actually carrying this divine energy. So I'm inviting this energy to enter into my left leg and for me to try to sense it there, deep down in my left leg. Now I turn my attention as if I am placing my out breath into the whole of the pelvic area. Now turning my attention to the abdomen, but especially slightly below the navel, which is the center of gravity for everybody's body, as if I am placing my out breath in my abdomen slightly below the navel. But again, a reminder, remaining as relaxed as possible, maintaining the right posture, which is verticality without rigidity, and an attitude of prayer, inviting this subtle, more intelligent energies, more conscious energies to nourish me. Now I turn my attention to my chest, as if I am placing my out breath in my chest. And see if you can actually hear your heart beating without touching the heart with your hand. As long as I am alive, this heart will keep beating. And then just for a few moments, you can actually put your right hand on your heart just to be sure that you actually become aware of this beating taking place, but then soon to let go and to see if I can actually hear this heart beating without necessarily placing my hand on my heart. Now I place my out breaths, as it were, into my throat. As you know, certain kind of music, one says, my throat is choked. And now for at least 2 or 3 breaths, place your out breath between the eyes but slightly above the eyes, which at least in the Indian tradition is very much emphasized as the place for the third eye. And always a suggestion that great sages have not only the ordinary eyes, but they have an unusual third eye. Of course, it is explicitly so, more or less, indicated in sculpture or in painting with the third eye of Shiva in the Indian tradition. Now I place my out breath in my right arm. Again, amazing the whole structure of this arm. I did not create this. I could hardly create my nails. Sensing the life energy in this right arm, it's the divine energy which is keeping it alive. Always coming back to this obvious realization. Left arm. Now I place my out breath. Remember, I am breathing in as if through my skull. And I am placing my out breath in my back, the whole of the back, from the neck to the base of the spine. And carefully watch, is the right side of the spine more active or the left side? By activity, I mean you would feel more energy on one side or the other side. And literally, if you actually were able to have a thermometer, there'll be a different temperature on the two sides. One side assists activity, the other side assists receptivity, which is the reason why, at least in the Indian tradition, women are called Vamangi, left side, because they are said to be, just based on the genitalia, human men get called active, women as receptive. Now I turn my attention to the head, placing my out breath in my head and not accepting anything I'm saying, but watch carefully. Do you sense more space in the head, more clarity, or more obscurity? Whatever. Don't just simply buy what I say. My wish is that people who come here would be searchers, not just believing this or that. Now take 3 breaths, placing your out breath into the whole of your body, right down to the toes. Then we will stop this to quieting the mind, but to return to, I'll present something. Also, I recommend that although we are not now focusing on this, but during our gathering, if and whenever you become aware of your breathing, remember we end up calling it your breathing. It's really the divine breath in you and in me. So for a moment, become aware of the breath, but without holding it outside or inside. We'll try to explore how we can approach this. And let me begin, first of all, to point out, maybe before I even go to this slide, let me just tell you an incident. On one occasion, I was just going for a walk with Krishnamurti. We used to call him Krishna Ji. This is the standard Indian way of speaking to his older senior person. So we were going for a walk. Suddenly he stopped, turned to me and said, he had a habit of saying, sir. I don't quite know where he got that, but very much addicted to that notion. Sir, what do you think is wrong with India? Now, by this time, I had learned not to try to reform Krishnamurti. I was willing to actually hear him. Earlier, I used to argue with him, trying to change his attitude or his words or trying to reform him. But by this time, I had learned that he's without reformation. He's not going to be reformed, certainly not by me. So I just waited and listened. And what he said was the following. The trouble with India is that the Brahmins have forgotten the tradition. Because most people addicted to Krishnamurti's teaching are under the impression that he was very much against the tradition. And in a certain way, there is some truth to that, because if you look etymologically, the word tradition and also it's very much connected with defying something, treachery, etymologically. So to some extent, it is true that he was not very interested in what ordinarily goes in the name of the tradition, going to this temple, bowing to this priest, giving this money, etc., etc. But the heart of the tradition is really what Krishnamurti's whole teaching is about. What is the heart of the teaching? This is what we will today really look at. Heart of the tradition really is, first of all, to recognize that the highest reality, whether we call it God or Allah or Brahma or the Absolute or whatever label you want to attach to it, that absolute reality is not some personification somewhere, taking record of my actions and then punishing me or giving me some prizes for having been a good guy. That these are embodiment of whatever we understand by truth with a capital T, love with a capital L, beauty with a capital B, consciousness or awareness, etc. Very strong emphasis that that is pervading the whole cosmos, this subtle, mysterious energy, and that it is really containing whatever we understand by love or truth, etc. So this remark of Krishnamurti here, it would be actually probably preferable for me to put a capital L for love here. As long as I am, love is not. Which is to say, very similar to the remark of Christ, which we already spoke about. Christ's remark was, unless you leave yourself behind, you cannot be a follower of mine. So as long as I am, namely, I haven't left myself behind, love is not. But love is here really referring to the quality, not really quality, but in fact an embodiment of the highest reality. I'll come back to this in a moment. First of all, now to describe to you how the highest reality is described. Usually, in the Indian tradition, starting from the Rig Veda, I have actually intentionally given the Sanskrit words here, but I have given their English translation. Satyam Ritam Brihat. Truth, order, vastness. Then other remarks are Jyotir Amritam Kama, light, eternity or eternal reality, love. Then little slightly later, this is in the Rig Veda, the top 2 lines or 4 lines, 2 in Sanskrit, 2 in English. After that, it comes to the Upanishads, which is slightly later, Sat Chit Anand, truth, consciousness or awareness, and delight or joy or happiness. You see, many different translations are possible for this. Now, 2 remarks here. First of all, the word for love is kama in Vedic Sanskrit. By the time of the Bhagavad Gita, which, by the way, in the Indian context is just a modern text, it's only 2000 years old. It's quite modern from the Indian historical point of view. but keep this in mind. But nevertheless, by the time of the Bhagavad Gita, the word kama is deteriorated more or less to mean selfish desire. Exactly the same thing happened with the Greek word eros. I think I mentioned this even yesterday in passing. For example, Socrates makes this remark that any true philosophy can be done only in a state of eros. But by the time of New Testament, eros had acquired a very negative meaning to it. So other words are required. Similarly, in the Bhagavad Gita, then bhakti comes to replace kama. But I'm trying to draw your attention here, partly because if you have a Theosophical Society background, the secret doctrine by Madame Blavatsky has the whole preface to that is the quotation from the Rig Veda, the last chapter in the Rig Veda called the Nasadiya Sukta. And the very first remark there is that in the beginning was Kama, in the beginning was love. So that is how sacred doctrine actually takes that as the preface from which the whole doctrine is clarified or elaborated. Generally, in the Western tradition, these are the remarks which are used. Omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, meaning all present, all powerful, all knowing. But often they don't seem to emphasize the other aspects. Omniamorosus, all loving. Also, omnidelectabilis, all delightful. Those expressions are occasionally used by great sages in the Abrahamic tradition, but in general, I have hardly ever seen anybody refer to those 2 remarks. But then the other emphasis, which is to be understood, is truth, love, beauty. Now, again, I keep reminding you have already heard me say this at least twice earlier in last time. If we actually believe, as every religion keeps saying, that God is omnipresent, so he or she or it is right ahead of me, in front of me, behind me, inside me, everywhere. So everything you do or I do, even our thinking or feeling, is in the gaze of God. If I take this remark seriously, that God is omnipresent, this will actually radically change my whole life. But it is easy to just use these words, God is omnipresent, and then let's just go on and have another chocolate or something. So, then a very strong suggestion, in fact, very much paraphrased from Romans, St. Paul's letters in the Romans, you can look it up. There are many levels outside us as well as inside. This is everywhere understood. Microcosmos is mirroring the megalocosmos, meaning all external universes in principle mirrored inside each one of us. Subtler levels of the cosmos outside can be understood only by the subtler levels within. The highest resides in our deepest. And this principle of correspondence that I have here, this is more or less paraphrased from Romans letter to the, St. Paul in the Romans. You can look it up. The eyes of the flesh see the things of the flesh. The eyes of the spirit see the things of the spirit. occasionally some hardcore scientific types, usually not actually those who are practicing science, but those who just are enamored by science. They would often say, well, science is the only avenue to truth. And then they say, well, the astronauts went into the outer space. They didn't see any angels, so the angels don't exist. But let me remind you, they still carry the eyes of flesh. Should we just dismiss Christ because he could see angels? Is he just mistaken? Similarly, even in our contemporary times, let me remind you of one incident, actually, with a walk with Krishnamurti. This was at a different time. There was a little pond, and we stopped there, and he said to me, listen how they sing. Now, I haven't the foggiest idea what he's hearing. I'm not hearing anything. But he didn't use these words, but my impression was that he was hearing some subtler energies. We might call them fairies, but this is my expression, not his expression. Krishnamurti was always very hesitant about getting pinned down to any of these things. So he didn't specifically use that expression, but he said to me, listen how they sing. So he is obviously hearing something that I am unable to hear. Because I don't have the eyes or the ears of the spirit, as he certainly did. Similarly, I am therefore pointing out to you that because of our astronauts could not see the angels, doesn't mean that the angels don't exist. Why should we dismiss Christ or the Buddha or any of the other people or Krishnamurti in contemporary times who is able to hear or see something that we are unable to see? Now, this kind of remark I have made more than once here. Obviously, I did not create myself. A particle of divinity or the breath of God is what is keeping me alive. The fundamental characteristic of this self with a capital S are love, truth, and joy. Not because I'm saying this, but this is what great sages say. I'm more or less just trying to quote them, trying to therefore understand what they are inviting us to actually become aware of. We cannot be fully ourselves until we give expression to that self, which is quite different from my usual worldly self. The usual self occupation interferes with my connection with the self. Then, one common lesson of all scriptures and sages, at least any that I have read or come across in any way, whether contemporary sages, Jean de Salzman, who was my great teacher at Krishnamurti, or contemporary sages, I did not meet them, but they were quite contemporary, Vivekanand, Raman Maharishi, or Aurobindo. This is my impression that this is the standard common expression of all of them. As long as I remain the way I am, I cannot come to truth or real or God. What is needed is a radical transformation of my whole being. And the aim of that transformation or any spiritual practice is not freedom for myself, but freedom from myself. I already have quoted Christ's remark, and then you see Krishnamurti's remark is very much to do with as long as I am, love is not. It's capital L love, which is the characteristic of the highest reality. Then now I especially want to focus on love. The oldest text in any Indo-European language is the Rig Veda. And this is the quotation. You can see this in the preface to not Annie Besant, to Madame Blavatsky's book. In the beginning arose love, which was the primal germ cell of the mind. Then another Veda, Atharva Veda, says, love is the firstborn, loftier than the gods, the fathers and men. You, O love, are the eldest of all, altogether mighty. To you we pay homage. just also to remind you, this is first letter of John in the Bible. Whoever is without love does not know God, for God is love. Then it is repeated, God is love, and whoever remains in love remains in God and God in him. It is important here to distinguish, one could say God is loving. That is quite a common expression. What is being said here that God is love? That is to say the very structure of God is love. It's not that it is one of the qualities or one of the characteristics of God. The very structure of God is love. I'm reminding you this specially because the other structures which are attached to or other qualities of the structure are truth, beauty, love, consciousness. These are among the ones. And precisely because Christ could genuinely say, the Father and I are one, therefore naturally love oozes out of him. Every remark of Christ carries the word love in it. And his whole expression of his life, whatever we are aware of or whatever is even indirectly mentioned in the Gospels or anywhere else, he is obviously exuding love. And those who more emphasize the word of consciousness or awareness, clearly, what would you associate with somebody like the Buddha? Any lack of awareness, lack of consciousness? So when we say that these people are connected with God, or they are the Father and I are one, or in the Indian tradition, the very strong tendency to say Atman is Brahma, which is to say my deepest self is identically the same as the highest reality. Here, then, a remark in the Gospel of Philip, a non-canonical gospel. Faith is receiving and love is giving. The Greek word that is used is agape. As I told you, that word eros was the earlier one used. In fact, Madame Blavatsky used the word eros herself. But later on, by the time of the New Testament, the word eros is left out simply because it becomes lower down. Agape is used. Love refuses nothing and takes nothing. It is the highest and vastest freedom. All exists through love. This is Gospel of Philip. And I draw your attention to the letters of St. Paul in the first letter to Corinthians. If I speak in human and angelic tongues but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal. And if I have the gift of prophecy and comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, and if I hand my body over so that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. And it continues, love never fails. If there are prophecies, they will be brought to nothing. If tongues, they will cease. If knowledge, it will be brought to nothing. For we know partially and we prophesy partially. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. So faith, hope, love remain, these three. But the greatest of these is love. I'm intentionally trying to point out to you the emphasis placed on this. We should not look this only as a word. Then a little later on, Dante, hardly a negligible poet, wrote a very famous book called The Divine Comedy. The first canto in that Divine Comedy is here. Midway upon the journey of my life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. I think since many of you are from USA, in USA one would say he was having a midlife crisis. That's what it's. Midway upon the journey of my life, I found myself within a forest dark. For the straightforward pathway had been lost. And the last, then just some of you probably know all this, but I'm simply reminding you, this great poet then undertakes a search. And maybe psychologically, he goes deep down in his own psyche, visits even the various levels of hell and then various levels of heaven. And the last canto, which I have quoted here, is he says this is the highest heaven he's allowed to visit. My own impression is he's really saying this is the highest level that he is able to describe. But the way he puts it, this is the highest heaven he's allowed to visit. But always implying that there are still higher levels, higher heavens. There he says, there my will and desire were one with love, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Now, this is 13th century. By the time of the 16th century, with Newton's Principia, famous book of his, it's only the force of gravitation that moves the sun and the other stars, not love. You see the whole shift that has taken place. And now, here are a couple of remarks of Madame Blavatsky. According to Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine, Eros is the first forehead, which is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed on cosmic substance as the laws of nature, which is simply to say that how God brings about the laws of nature is love oozing out into nature. So love becomes the bridge. Forehead, in his capacity of divine love, she again uses the word eros, is the aggregate of all the spiritual creative ideations above and of all the electrodynamic and creative forces below, in heaven and on earth. I'm simply trying to draw your attention to the great emphasis placed by great sages on the whole, not only the existence of love in the cosmic level, but the importance of love. Here is a remark of a contemporary sage, Gurdjieff. Real love is the basis of all the foundations, the source. The religions have perverted and deformed love. It was by love that Jesus performed miracles. Real love joined with magnetism. All accumulated vibration creates a current. The current brings the force of love. Real love is a cosmic force which goes through us. If we crystallize it, it becomes a power, the greatest power in the world. Then, this is another remark of his, which is actually useful to look at because he says, love of consciousness evokes the same in response. Love of feeling evokes the opposite. Love of body depends only on type and polarity. Because as you know, the usual English expression, oh, they're making love. Now, what does this mean? They're having sex. So there are many different levels at which the word love gets used. So be very careful about this. What is being reminded here by Gurdjieff are different levels. Now, personally, in my own experience, I have met 2 or 3 people. Krishnamurti is one of them. Jean de Salzman, another, who was really my real teacher for many years. They actually loved me with consciousness. But I don't completely agree here with what Gurdjieff is saying, that it evokes the same in response. In my case, what it evoked from their love was obedience. They exuded love, And what came from my side was not that I'm now loving them. One could call it that, but it was much closer to my wish to obey, to carry out what they are saying. So I don't wholly agree with this remark of Guruji, but I don't totally disagree with this either. But love of feeling evokes the opposite. This I can tell you from my own experience. Some friends of mine have heard me tell this story earlier. Once I was in the university and it was getting about the closing time, about 5 p.m. I was coming home, just feeling a little lovey-dovey. So on the way home, I especially bought some nice ice cream and some flowers. So I was going to bring them to my wife with great sense of feeling of love. But when I came home, she was not even there. She had gone out with the dog for a walk. So I got mad as hell. So you see, love of feeling always evokes the opposite. Here I was feeling so lovey-dovey and suddenly I was mad as hell because she was not there. So don't simply buy any of these remarks that people make, whether however great sages they may be, but to see how it actually applies to you. And the love of body, as I already mentioned, this is a standard English expression. They were making love, meaning they were having sex. Hmm. Love of body depends only on type and polarity. Who do we get attracted to? Who does one have sex with? That depends on type and polarity. But here is a remark of my teacher, Jean the Salzman, which is also worth listening to. Love is a quality of consciousness. To live without love is to live in perpetual contradiction, a refusal of the real, of what is. Without love, one can never find what is true, and all human relations are painful. Change in being is possible through conscious effort towards a quality of thinking and feeling that brings a new capacity to see and to love. So here I have quoted several ancient sages and contemporary ones. And here I will have a few other quotations here just so that you can ponder over this. Love is the only reality, and it is not a mere sentiment. It is the ultimate truth that lies at the heart of creation. This is Rabindranath Tagore, a Nobel Prize winner in India. Then St. Augustine's remark, love is the beauty of the soul. Plato's remark, love is the joy of the good, the wonder of the wise, the amazement of the gods. The madness of love is the greatest of heaven's blessings. Now I bring some more remarks of Krishnamurti about love. The flowering of love is meditation. The moment you have in your heart this extraordinary thing called love and feel the depth, the delight, the ecstasy of it, you will discover that for you the world is transformed. Then, as you probably already know, those of you who have read anything by Krishnamurti, he was always trying to call us to relate with intelligence beyond thought. This I can tell you, maybe again I mentioned, let me give you a personal incident here. This was in 1984. He was still alive. And there is a huge encyclopedia called Encyclopedia of Spirituality or something like this. Has 2 volumes on Hinduism, 2 on Christianity, 2 on Islam, etc. So it's a large encyclopedia. Both of these volumes, they are edited by different editors on Hinduism. They invited me to write an article. So in the first one, I have written an article on yoga. where as I mentioned yesterday, I try to point out that Buddhi Yoga is the main yoga that Krishna is teaching, but somehow people don't seem to mention it. And second article or second volume of the Encyclopedia on Hinduism, they asked me to write an article on Krishnamurti because it was called, the first volume was called From the Vedas to Vedanta. The second one was called Modern Flowerings of the Tradition. So Krishnamurti was one of the modern flowerings of the tradition from their point of view. So since Krishnamurti was still alive, I thought, well, I will check with him. What is the heart of his teaching? Since I'm supposed to write this article. According to my understanding, the heart of his teaching is or was to be more and more free of the level of thinking and come to an intelligence beyond thought. So I asked him, Krishnaji, would you agree that this is the heart of your teaching? I was really quite surprised by his response. He gave me a big hug. He said, Sir, if you speak from your heart, whatever you say I have said, I will agree I have said it. So I have a special responsibility whenever I talk about Krishnamurti's remarks, I have to speak from my heart. Then he would agree with me. And I'm now reminding you that it is my understanding. In fact, I wrote that article in that encyclopedia on Krishnamurti, where I actually point out that heart of his teaching really is to call us to a level of intelligence beyond thought. Now you can read these remarks here. The process of thought ever denies love. It is thought that has emotional complications, not love. Thought is the greatest hindrance to love. Thought creates a division between what is and what should be, and on this division, morality is based. But neither the moral nor the immoral know love. This moral structure created by the mind to hold social relationships together, it is not love, but a hardening process like that of cement. Thought does not lead to love. Thought does not cultivate love, for love cannot be cultivated as a plant in the garden. The very desire to cultivate love is an action of thought. This remark actually continues. You will ask then, what is love? Love is a state of being in which thought is not. But the very definition of love is a process of thought. And so it is not love. So you see, this is very important. Any definition of love, according to Krishnamurti, is not love. But all the sages would agree in a slightly different way. They would say any definition of God is not God. But still, they are obliged to use some words. So the words that get used are truth, love, beauty, consciousness, joy. But nevertheless, they will still say that whatever you understand by these words, that's not God. So here is this remark of Krishnamurti, come back to it again. Love is a state of being in which thought is not. But the very definition of love is a process of thought. So it is not love. We have to understand thought itself and not try to capture love by thought. The denial of thought does not bring about love. There is freedom from thought only when its deep significance is fully understood. And for this, profound self-knowledge is essential. Not vain and superficial assertions, meditation and not repetition, awareness and not definition reveal the ways of thought. Without being aware and experiencing the ways of thought, love cannot be. Here I have given the precise reference for his remarks, those of you who are interested. Love is an avenue of subtle perception. Spiritual disciplines are all concerned with integration and wholeness, above all with the integration of truth and love. Love is required to know truth, and knowledge of truth is expressed by love. Here is the remark of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Only through constant love can I be known and seen as I really am and entered into. But also he says, the knower of truth loves me ardently. So love and truth are intermingled. One leading is like a spiral. If you cultivate more and more truth, it needs to generate more and more sense of love in you. Or if you cultivate more and more love, it needs to bring you closer and closer to truth. It's like a spiral. Real love is not my love. This remark is a corollary of the larger statement that life is not just my life. We can participate in the movement of life and in the whole large movement of love. God is love is something we do not know, but the sages can see that this whole universe is full of love. This vast current of energy also passes through me if I am available. I can participate in the vast movement of love, but it is not my love. At the same time, this particular combination of matter and energy is unique in the universe. Each one of us is a unique localization of energy of and matter. But remember, we did not create ourselves. The very energy of our real love is divine and is seeking itself. It is a particle of the divine in me, which is seeking or loving the divine. The devil in me is not eager to love the divine. It's the particle of divine in me that wishes to love. There is a song that is sung in India, and the Gurjeef people in India have made this into their theme song, and which simply says, "What strange game you're playing with me, O Lord. You are the one seated in my heart, and you're seeking yourself. You are the one seated in my heart, and you're seeking yourself." That is true. It's the divine energy in me seeking the divine, wishing to connect with the divine, and sometimes it occasionally allows the divine to touch me, but most of the time it is just occupied with me, me, me. But also I thought some of you would like this. This is not really very much connected with what I'm saying, but look at it. Oh, innocent victims of Cupid, remember this terse little verse. To let a fool kiss you is stupid. To let a kiss fool you is worse. Now, I suggest to you, those who are interested, there is an article actually on my website, but it's also in my book called Science and the Sacred. The article's title is Healing the Soul, Truth, Love, and God. The main person in charge of the Eastern Orthodox Church, what do they call them? Not pontiff, they're called, I've forgotten the title for them. They had once organized a conference and they had invited me to give a talk there. That's the talk I gave there called Healing the Soul, Truth, Love, and God. But it is on my website. You don't need to pay for it. Or my book, Science and the Sacred, actually has that too. And then I often recommend to people to go to my website. There are many articles there, and also interviews and videos, etc. And also I have my email here. If you wish any questions, etc., you can write to me. This is just a book I had written on Krishnamurti. Two birds on one tree. I will stop the slides unless there is some specific thing that anybody especially wants to focus on, but maybe you can ask me to come back to the slides. Otherwise, I'll stop the slides. What do you say, Ananya? Should we just stop the slides and take a 10 minutes break?
We can. I was actually I looked it up for you. Ecumenical patriarch.
Yes.
Is that the word that you were looking for?
Uh,
For the head of the Greek Orthodox Church?
yeah, they call them patriarchs. Huh?
Yeah, patriarchs.
Yes. Yes, they had organized a conference. This was, my goodness, in 1995. Part of the way it was, they were actually in a ship traveling to many places, going to many places. And then these people were gathered there, nearly 70 or 80 people, and having, of course, meals together as well as conferences and talks. So that's where I had given this talk. Okay.
So I have a question.
Yes, please.
Um, so the quote by Krishnamurti about the last line of it is the world is transformed. And it's about staying in that state of love,
Yes.
and then where love is not.
Yes.
Now, I think that all of us who have been searchers, and I have a hard time doubting this because I've had my own experiences with it, where there's that feeling that you're not physically contained any longer in the body.
Yes.
There's a deep connection with everything that's around you. And you feel so outside of yourself. I mean, it's not even something that like we've said, you cannot put it into words. So, but it only lasts for, just a split second or a few seconds. And then we move right back into the me, my kind of thing, kind of world. And it just, it's interesting because I often wonder, why is it that we lose? Because so the minute that you have that experience, of course, like Krishnaji says, everything is different. Everything
Yeah.
is different. You even vibrate differently. So there is this process of transformation. It's not immediate, like he says, that it just immediately happens. But there is a change there is some transformation that happens, but it's this gradual process, like the layers keep being taken off. But I always often wonder, what, why doesn't it stay? What is it that doesn't allow it to stay? And I understand the whole thing that he's talking about, it's thought. But then how can we get to a space where we don't let thought be the controlling factor? Does
Well,
that make sense?
yes, this is actually one of the main reasons why in any serious spiritual teaching, there is first of all a suggestion that at least for a little while every day, we may call it meditation or call it whatever you like, but that for a little while every day, to sit quietly without getting occupied with the mind, without trying to achieve this or to accomplish this and that. So one can go for a walk. Actually, Krishnamurti, very often for him, meditation consisted in going for a walk in the woods, not just sitting down in lotus position doing meditations, but that there is no harm in that either. So, but the suggestion really is that most of the time, our mind is occupied with this constantly agitated world going around, some idea or the other, some association or the other, and that it is helpful if I begin to gradually practice finding at least a few minutes to begin with, maybe half an hour or maybe a little longer, in which the mind is a little quiet. Then one experiences something which becomes difficult to describe it to anybody else, but one can also it actually changes the way, at least temporarily, how one behaves. One actually has more compassion for others, but sooner or later we return to our usual self, which is the reason why a strong suggestion that not to imagine that suddenly there will be a complete transformation. Even the Buddha makes this remark that he has to renew himself every day. So in the mornings he would sit for a long time. So my impression is that if this is required even of the Buddha, it
Yeah.
surely is required of people like us to therefore undertake as many standard recommended practices as we can. And excuse me, give me a moment here. My daughter seems to have. Really, if you look at the way how our education proceeds, it seems to me practically day one, how can I compete with other students so I get better marks, so I can go to a better college or get a scholarship, etc. So the whole emphasis in the university or college or even the primary schools really is on competition. And then that basically takes us more and more outside rather than looking inside. But I think if one begins to feel this, then one wants to find ways of also. My impression is very strong that I think I have earlier said that also a couple of days back, that it is very helpful, in fact necessary, to encounter some other fellow searchers. Otherwise, one can either get into some fantasy about something or into despair, because if you quietly and deeply look at yourself, we would find not only the divine energy in us, but also the devil is there. Or if you like more modern psychological terminology, there are also obstacles, or the shadow side is what Carl Jung calls it, the shadow side. But the devilish side, those tendencies are also there, and it can be very discouraging to have an clear self-investigation. So it's helpful to have that, but realizes that what I see about myself deep down is actually true for the human condition. It's not only so for Ravi, that only Ravi has the devil. It's part of the human condition. The whole external cosmos is in principle mirrored inside me. I think even today I showed that slide, megalocosmos mirrored in the microcosmos is one way of putting it. But in fact, the devil also has its place. Maybe in my, possibly tomorrow, or sorry, we're not going to meet for the next 3 days, but when we meet on Tuesday, I'll point out there is no reason to be against the devil or against the ego. It also has its place. In fact, my teacher, Jean de Salzman, very much emphasized this. Ego is a good servant, but a bad master. As long as it is actually being a servant, it can be helpful. But the moment it takes over, that's where the problem comes. Anybody else wishes to bring something? Yes, Meg.
Yeah, so I'm Italian, and so I was very happy to see Dante in this presentation, and it's a consideration, and I would like to hear also your comment. So the Divine Comedy, the way it starts, it shows us that the moment for search, the moment for starting or keep up with practice is not an ideal moment. It's in the middle of the crisis and it's in the middle of the struggle. So we should not wait for an ideal moment to start a search, but can be even a push to go for that search of love. And eventually Dante arrives in that place. So it was very inspiring to link something that I had to study in middle school.
Yes.
Come back in this context to tell us now is the moment to, undertake the search, even if it's not the ideal moment in me for a personal crisis, or it's not the ideal moment in the context because it's full of noise and it's full of crisis.
No, Dante is actually one of my very favorite poets. whenever I can possibly find an appropriate place, I try to quote him one way or the other. The whole Divine Comedy, actually, he's visiting the hell, various levels of the hell, and what takes place in hell, and then one can honestly see that all those tendencies are also in us. The hell is not only out there somewhere, the hell is also in us, or we are in hell, if you like, will be another way of putting it. But we are also in heaven sometimes. And his description, well, you probably know, may be more familiar with his writing than I am, but he says he's not allowed to go above a certain level of heaven. Now, I somehow have a feeling that he just wants to say he can't describe something subtler than that or higher than that. But why would he be forbidden to go above that level? There is a competition, actually. You know the background of how he got into this. The, and also, you probably know the church was very much against him. The church is against any serious searcher in any way. Christ is a good example. They just crucified him. There, in that case, you have it's not the church, but the Pharisees. But the same thing happens everywhere. It's a tragedy, but so don't be publicly announcing your search. Somebody will get against you. On the other hand, do find some fellow searchers. I actually highly recommend that, because by oneself, sometimes one gets very discouraged. Oh, I'm not getting anywhere. Nothing makes any sense.
And also in the Divine Comedy, Dante is not alone going around in the Inferno. Virgilio, the poet, the Roman poet, is with him to try to guide him and trying to support him as much as he can during the exposure to this punishment, for example, that are related to what people did in life. So it's nice to see that also in the Divine Comedy, Dante is not just having vision, but he follows one of the author that he really loved, Virgilio, to accompany him, at least in the Inferno.
Yeah. Inferno, but he doesn't finally go to heaven with him.
No. At a certain point, Virgilio has to stop, yes.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else wishes to bring something? So, but do read Dante. I think don't you think we should advise people to read carefully? Dante was a great poet, actually. It's written in Latin. That's another thing for most people. But of course, translations are available in every language now. But he wrote in Latin.
Tanner, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. So just having grown up here in Ojai and attending, excuse me, some of the schools here, there's heavy influence. I went to Besant Hill up in Upper Ojai, so there was an influence of Krishnamurti there. But I haven't actually read much of his literature or studied him too much beyond just reading at the feet of the master and then just hearing anecdotes from different people. But I've also come to know that he is really well known even outside of the valley. So as I've gotten older, my perspective on who he is has really changed. And I just didn't I didn't appreciate what I was being influenced by at the time. In fact, I actually have a cousin in the Midwest, and he always asks me this. He's kind of living in the 70s. He always goes, "Does that Maharaji still live in Ojai?" And he's talking about Krishnamurti. So we always laugh and go, "Okay, cousin Dan, we'll have to explain what's going on here." But I digress from that. My main question is, where should I start with Krishnamurti's teachings?
Well, first of all, just as a simple remark about Ojai, Ojai is really absolutely an unusual town. The only place where you have in their public garden portrait or remarks of Krishnamurti and Annie Besant, two very remarkable people in the history of the world. And there is no other town, even in India. In a way, one could say that Krishnamurti was from Indian background. And Annie Besant, as you probably know, although she was of British origin, married to a Christian priest. But then she got divorced, went to India, learned Sanskrit, translated many Sanskrit texts into English. She was a very remarkable person. And the two of their, to have their portraits in Ojai and their remarks is very striking to me. In fact, whenever I go to Ojai, I always try to go to that entrance there to look at their remarks there. So I recommend that to you. You can suggest it to your friend. But personally, I think most of the books attributed to Krishnamurti are actually not written by him, not even read by him. These are his talks, which people can write down or record them and then write down, and possibly in the process changing some words here, there, or improving the grammar. But there are two books of his written by him. One is, I think, now I'll have to remember the titles of these. Maybe Ananya, would you remember? There are
Well, I
one
was
is his
actually
own diary,
thinking of his notebook.
his notebook, which is
Yeah.
more or less like his diary. There you can actually have the direct expressions by his own remark. Otherwise, if somebody is not just trying to criticize him or to argue with him, which is what I did for many years, but gradually becoming really more trying to just listen to him. Even he took me to this tree and he said, under that tree is where a whole transformation took place. But then, partly really is a more or less a mental habit. I asked him to give some more details of what process took place. He says, well, that's what everybody wants to know, so they can imitate. So he asked me to shut up. So in a way, I saw myself having similar kind of questions arise as almost everybody else. You know, we are very interested in what was the quality of the people who met him or the nature of the experience, etc., etc. But in general, he was very hesitant describing any of this, because then he says people begin to imitate this. But then sometimes, although, for example, that many people have said that he had special, what we would call occult powers, or in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, we call siddhis, curing some people of their disease. And in general, he would refuse to have any engagement with any of this. But then, on at least on one occasion in a conversation with me, he said, they say that the speaker, referring to himself as the speaker, they say that the speaker had these powers. Maybe they're right. This is Krishnamurti saying to me, this is the language. They say that the speaker had these kind of powers. Maybe they're right, but we don't need to get fixed up with this. You know? So in a way, but his notebooks are really more or less his own words. He sometimes actually describes those experiences. And then, although he always refused to regard himself as a guru or as a teacher, but if you look at some of the very last remarks he made before he died, hardly a day or two before that, there he even says, you folks don't listen to me because I am the guru. And he even uses that expression, much to everybody's surprise. And so in a way, he insisted on not being just followed just because he says something, but have your own inquiry, personal inquiry, self-inquiry. He was very strong. In fact, he strongly makes this remark, there can be no wisdom without self-knowledge. This is one of his comments. I don't know whether I showed this today or not, but if I didn't, let me remind you, there can be no wisdom without self-knowledge. This is a remark of his. And I think, but you see, the tragedy is most organized religions are not encouraging any of this. Which is why he, in a manner of speaking, he was against religion. Although, as I just pointed out, really, he very much felt sad that the Brahmins have forgotten their tradition. The heart of the tradition is really freedom from me, me, me. Any tradition. It may be expressed differently. Leave yourself behind, sometimes put very much more strongly, die to yourself. For example, even St. Paul says, if you're interested, first letter to the Corinthians, 15th chapter, I die daily. This is the remark of St. Paul. So sometimes very strong expressions get used. But in general, the call is to be free of what constantly occupies us. Just my achievement, whether I'm being approved or not being approved, am I getting more power? And when the Satan wants to test the Christ, or Christ to be, if you like. Similarly, when Mara wants to test the Buddha or Buddha to be, these are the very things they test them with. You probably know the background of this. Let me just give you a very quick summary of this. Mara, first of all, sends his own daughters to seduce him. He has 3 daughters, and they're all trying to seduce the Buddha by singing, chanting, dancing all around him. So now, is there a human being who is not drawn by pleasure of one kind or the other? Especially sexual pleasure is very strong. None of us will be here, existed without somebody having had sex. So there is no reason to become against sex. Nothing in the whole manifested universe, even the trees, the plants, the animals, human, nothing could exist without that. But then to get wholly occupied with that, that is what becomes the temptation. Then the other thing he says, I will turn this mountain into a mountain of gold. Now, ask yourself impartially. I sometimes ask myself, for me, a few $1 million will do to do whatever nonsense they want me to do. A whole mountain of gold. You see, the bigger the searcher, bigger the temptation. Then the third thing he says, I will give you sovereignty over the whole world. Exactly similar things about the Christ, especially the sovereignty over the whole world. Power, pleasure, wealth. This is what is running the whole universe, and we need to look at ourselves impartially, which is why such a strong emphasis on impartial self-study. Then one sees that I am just like every other human being. But on the other hand, since something draws me, interests me, what the sages are saying, then one begins to listen to them more carefully or read carefully what they've said, and to see if I can then begin to practice something to connect with it. Otherwise, it's just the general human condition being described again and again. But anyhow, I think I probably said that enough now. So anybody else wishes to bring it? I see Karen, please.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. A couple of things. First, going back to what Micah was saying with regard to Dante and the timing, I was reminded of Yoga Sutra 1.1, starting with Atha, now, here now is the teaching of yoga. You reminded us of that, Ravi, in your translations. But my question is with regard to the term viveka or discernment. And with regard to the transformation in and of yoga, in an attempt of knowing or seeing or experiencing the Buddhi mind.
Yes.
Discernment piece is always tricky.
Yes. But again, you see the language problem. In general, that word Vivek, very famous book by Shankara called Vivek Chudamani, is translated as the crown jewel of discrimination.
Mm.
So at some stage, that would have been appropriate translation, but language itself changes slightly. Now discrimination has a very different feeling behind it than discernment does.
Yeah.
So I'm simply pointing out that actually the very famous book of Shankara is called, in Sanskrit, it is Vivek Chudamani, crown jewel or crest jewel of discernment is what I would say. But its English translation is crown jewel of discrimination. So be a little careful with the language, but on the other hand, you're using it rightly, discernment. But the kind of discernment there really is very strong emphasis that knowledge, it cannot be regarded as true knowledge from a spiritual point of view unless it transforms the knower. So the purpose of knowledge there is not to get more data or more information. The kind of knowledge which is emphasized, whether it is by the Buddha or by Christ or any of the sages, is the knowledge that can transform the quality of the knower. So, which is why, for example, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra says, Vivek would lead to liberation. Discernment can lead to liberation. Otherwise, one can have all kinds of knowledge about there are so many galaxies, so many birds, so many trees, etc. But does it change anything in the person who is the knower? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna very strongly makes this remark, especially in the 13th chapter. If you're interested, you can read it very carefully. There he actually says, what is true knowledge? Describing the true knowledge, he's really describing the characteristics of the knower rather than the true, that is the real knowledge.
It seems to me, though, here in the state of California and in the yoga wellness community, that people feel like they're being transformed, and it seems disingenuous in many ways, even though they feel like they're being enlightened.
Well, enlightenment is a little too early, but
Yeah.
I remind when I was a young boy, actually, I have a very clear memory of this. I was about 12 or 13-year-old, and the town where I was, a place called Chandigarh in Punjab in India. From there, one could see the lower mountains of the Himalayas. So one day I said, well, what the hell? Everybody keeps talking about climbing the big mountain, so I'm going to go there. So I went, tried practically the whole day. Then I got on top of one of the mountain. Then was the only time I could see the other peaks. Until that time, that was the peak. And I was going to climb it, damn it, I was going to go to the top of the Himalayan mountain. And only when I got there, I see how low I was, that there were so many more peaks there. So I often actually remind people that not to fantasize that I'll begin from Mount Everest. This is one of the difficulties when we listen to people like Krishnamurti or Christ or the Buddha. In a certain way, they are really speaking from the Mount Everest of awareness. We can be touched by it, but to fantasize that that's where I begin from, where they are from, is quite absurd. We need to begin from where we are. So it's fine for him to say, to be free of thought. Well, am I free of thought? I need to sort of, first of all, see the slavery that I have to thought. Similarly, for many other things, this was actually this was one major distinction, at least in my experience, between my teacher, Jean de Salzman, and Krishnamurti. They were both absolutely remarkable people at their own high level. But she could come down to my low level and lift me from there. Krishnamurti always stayed at the Mount Everest of consciousness, always spoke from that level. Almost everything else anybody else said didn't make any sense. He would dismiss it or say, if you try to argue about it, oh, you're too clever for your own good or something like that. So one of the difficulties really is, in my judgment, that we forget I cannot just begin, for example, Christ saying, love your enemy. Do I begin from there? I hardly love my neighbor. Or even with my own kids, I often end up arguing or something or the other. And then temporarily, I'm obviously not loving them. So one needs to be completely more and more impartial and honest, and to see that I need to begin from where I am, not from the Mount Everest of these great insights, but these great insights are a call. So it'll be stupid to dismiss them in any sense. They're a call for us to undertake our journey, but the journey begins from where I am. Otherwise, I'll just imagine that I'm on the top of Mount Everest. Priscilla has her hand raised. Please speak.
I'm very drawn to the remark, God is love, and your expression that this is the constitution of reality, of truth, but I see how easily my understanding of it becomes the understanding of the words.
Yes.
So how does one move from seeing the words, even appreciating the depth of this expression, and becoming able to participate?
Well, there is actually a suggestion made by Gurdjieff in this regard. He actually suggests that initially one should try experiencing love or even trying to love creatures from whom one does not expect a reward. For example, even just loving some birds, trees, leaves, because there one is not expecting some reward right away. Because part of the tragedy of our situation, of human situation, is that whatever I do, I want some special result from it, which may even be, I may even say that I want to be free of myself. But even that is my one of my results, which is why the great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart actually makes this remark, which very much struck me. Some of you may have heard me mention this earlier. He actually makes this remark that complete poverty is required. He uses the word poverty, even not wishing to do the will of God.
Mhm.
You see, because when I say I want to do the will of God, even that has some agenda behind it, as if that may make me enlightened or that may get me into heaven or whatever. Because I don't know what God is. I can read something about said something by great sages, but that doesn't mean that I really know what God is or what is the will of God. So this is actually a remark of Meister Eckhart, not my. And of course, the church naturally excommunicated him. Any great sage is not going to be put on by people. That is tragic. This is sadly much more so in the Abrahamic tradition than in India, because Christ says something, he's crucified. Any of the other sages said something or the other which doesn't agree with the general church ideas, they get excommunicated or put aside or something or the other. It's a
So
tragedy.
you're not suggesting that I don't try to love. That I don't try to love. I
No,
mean,
no, I'm not suggesting this, but whatever I think is the result I should gain from that love, how to be free of that, which is the call in a way, not to have my agenda behind that love,
hmm,
acquiring something from that.
hmm.
No, I think it's a good idea to try to practice love, which is why I quoted this. What Gurdjieff's remark is that initially it is easier to understand something by trying to practice love with creatures who are not going to give you something back. Just looking at some plants or some creature, animals.
And it would seem to me that this constant of letting go, you said that Eckhart talks about complete poverty. It's
Yes.
that whole, well, neti in some ways, but it's
Yes.
that whole thing of you do and it's going back to everything you've said before. It's the complete action, without thinking about the fruits of the action and just
Yes.
being in the action and letting go of everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, but as you can, I'm sure everybody would agree with me that given all our educational background, etc., and in the society, all the competition going on the whole time, it's not so easy to be free of this.
Mm.
But if one begins to actually see that it is difficult to be free of it, but at least one then begins to see what is the call. And then, as I often remind, that even the Buddha took many lifetimes to come to enlightenment. It may take us many lifetimes. We don't need to be in a hurry to get to Mount Everest. Just start the journey. That's what I recommend to people. Well, maybe you people would have a nice 3-day break now. Won't have to put up with my remarks. And we'll see each other on Tuesday.
Ravi,
Yes?
David, I just had a quick comment after what you just said about agenda.
Yes.
When you're in your mind and thought, you have agenda, but my experience is that when I'm in my heart, agendas go away. And when you're just in the love itself, there is no room for agenda, or there's no room for mind. So in some ways, it gets resolved when you're fully in your heart. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, no, I think it is true. It is, if you genuinely begin the journey, even if it's not getting to Mount Everest in any hurry, but the journey itself has many characteristics, many results, including that one is not then wholly self-occupied with my achieving this or that, or what you were just saying, that even the heart can become a little cleaner, rather than getting occupied with what I can gain from this. So the suggestion really is, in fact, this part was very much emphasized in the Buddhist tradition. Let me remind you of a very common expression. Because one of the remarks of the Buddha is, this is actually one of the noble truths, that desire leads to suffering. Then often a person would ask, isn't desire for nirvana also a desire that is going to lead to suffering? And the response to that was, yes, it is true. But if you undertake some of the practices that the Buddha is saying, which is what I meant by saying if you actually start the journey, then gradually you begin to see that the quality of your desire also begins to change. So the principle is correct that desire leads to suffering, but undertaking some of the practices recommended by the Buddha changes the quality of your desires. And this has been the standard response actually in the Buddhist tradition, that it is still true that desire leads to suffering, and very strong call to be free of fear and desire. This is a standard expression in the Buddhist literature. But then, is desire for nirvana also going to lead to suffering? Yes, but you begin the journey. And in the process, the quality of desire changes. So that's what you're saying, if I have understood you.
And I think when you say the quality of the desire changes, I think that movement toward the heart expression allows that quality to change. And that spark of the divine lives in the heart and the heart intelligence, which for me is very alive. And that is where our aliveness lives. And so when we're free of strategy, it's a beautiful burden to be free of, because you're not thinking about anything. You're just being and doing what's coming out of your heart. And it's a very freeing experience. And then at the same time, that heart intelligence comes back at you and teaches as you learn how to be more in it. So it becomes a teacher as you drop more into it, which again changes the quality of that desire, which is what you're saying. So that's how I connected it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep. No, which is the reason I keep saying that wherever one is, whatever, even one may have the most acquisitional intention, but it's good to begin the journey. The journey itself gradually clarifies what is required. Thank you very much. See you in 3 days.